So the story goes like this. There was a faithful man, a religious man, who was in a town where a flood came in. And he and his neighbors had been pushed out of their home, and in the immediate rise of the waters, had climbed up onto the roofs of their houses. And this man, being religious, knelt down on the roof of his house and prayed. And he asked God, he said, God, I know you're great and you're a deliverer and you have all power. I ask for a miracle that you save my life. Send your angels to rescue me. And so as he sat on the roof, as soon as he opened his eyes from his prayer, his neighbor comes by on a rowboat and says, hey, I've got an empty seat. Hop in. I'll take you to safety. He says, no. I've prayed, asked God. He's going to send his angels and send a miracle to deliver me. And the guy says, suit yourself, rows away. Almost immediately, as the waters rise higher and he scrambles higher up on the roof, another boat comes by, a motorboat this time. And the guy had been going around the houses picking people up, and he says, hey, hop in. I've got room for one more. No, he says, I've prayed and asked God to rescue me. He's going to send his angels and provide a miracle. Okay, suit yourself. Guy rides away, right? The waters continue to rise. He's now on the peak of his roof, and he closes his eyes one more time and pray, God, I know you're faithful. I know you're all powerful. Please send a miracle to rescue me and save me with your angels. And as soon as he opens his eyes, he looks up, there's a helicopter overhead, a rope lowers down, and the Coast Guard says, you grab the rope, we'll pull you to safety. And he says, no, I'm waiting for God's deliverance. He's gonna rescue me. And sure enough, the waters rise, the helicopter flies away, the man gets swept away and dies. And in heaven, he looks at God standing before the throne and goes, God, I prayed and I asked you to send me a miracle. Why didn't you save me? Why did you let me die? And God says, I sent you 2 boats and a helicopter. What more do you want, right? And this is a modern version of a story that goes back to well before 500 years before Christ. Aesop actually recorded in his Aesop's Fables a story called Hercules and the Wagoneer, very similar. A cart gets stuck in the mud. The man with his cart stuck in the mud hops off, kneels down and prays and calls on Hercules to save him and help him get this cart out of the mud. And Hercules shows up and goes, what are you doing sitting there praying? Put your shoulder against the wheel and push the cart out of the mud. And then as most Aesop's Fables go, it says, the gods help those who help themselves. That phrase was then later coined by Benjamin Franklin into the popular that we know, God helps those who helps themselves. And while this phrase is not biblical, you won't find it in Scripture, there's some interesting insights that we can take a look into with that. And one of them, I want to go practical then spiritual with it today with this on this Daily Dose. The first is this: while it's not in the Bible, there's some practical common sense to it. And the idea that would be parallel to biblical teaching in that if you have the capacity to help, you should. If you are helpless, there's a difference. And so the Bible often puts us into 2 categories, helpless and those who can help. And we find that even in 1 John 3, chapter 17, or chapter 3, verse 17, when he's talking about what love is even. He says this, he says, but if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. And so there's an exhortation to go, if you can help, you should help. But many times we also might find ourselves in a situation where we're in need and unable to help ourselves. Now that's what the Bible often refers to. And there are some parts where it even refers to those who call for help, but have the capacity to help themselves. And that's where it's chastised, we'll find in Proverbs, when he refers to the sluggard. There's a whole study you could do on that. Just look up the word sluggard in Proverbs. And there's chastisement for being able to help yourself and refusing to do so. And those are all good practical wisdom, and it talks about how we should conduct ourselves. But there's a deeper spiritual truth at work in this as well, and we find it over in Romans chapter 5 when God says this, in verse 6 of chapter 5 in Romans, for while we were still weak at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. For one will scarcely die for a righteous man, though perhaps for a good person we would even dare to die. But God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And so we see this spiritual truth that's even deeper in this, that God actually, his heart is for those who recognize that we are helpless. And that's really at the heart of the gospel, when we realize that we are incapable of saving ourselves, that we need desperately Christ, and we call on him for rescue. And that's really what the heart of the gospel is all about. And that begins the common and the practical application of then looking to go, Who is it that I can bless that it has need around me? And then live the principles of Christ when we first recognize that we have need. Call on his name, and then we look around to go, now what has God given me and how can I help others? And help myself. Hope that helps you today. Have a good day, Daily Dosers.